Thank you very much, Master of Ceremonies. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please allow me to adopt the protocol which has already been established. Can I ask Catholics to sign themselves, and others just put your body and mind in the frame of accepting the Lord. I start off with a scripture, Timothy 1:7, "For God hath not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound mind." Almighty God, creator of heaven and earth, we lift our soul in humble adoration, thanksgiving, and praise to you. We know that every good and perfect gift comes from you, and so we ask for your continued guidance and protection today. We ask for your graceful guidance as we seek to continue to build this institution to another 85 years. We put our trust into your hands, that you will bless this institution, bless the shareholders, bless the customers, the employees, board of directors, all those who have relationship with the institution. We pray that you continue to be our guiding light and ensure that all our investments moving forward are productive. We ask that you continue to lead and guide us, advise us, and may our journey today be fruitful and successful. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. You may be seated, I think.
Thank you, Director Alfred. So, ladies and gentlemen, to start off with proceedings again, I thank you, but I would like at this point in time to call on our chairman of the board, Mr. Nigel Fulgence, to just deliver what we have scheduled, the welcome remarks. So, Mr. Fulgence, please come to the
Once again, good morning. Geraldine Lendorfer's Vice President, Richard Moplezi, Second Vice President, Director Alfred, Director Scouten, Managing Director and his wife, Mr. Sejan, our guest speaker, Mr. Jules and his wife, Mrs. Andrea St. Rose, our former High Court Supreme Judge, Sir Dennis Byron. Pleasure to have you with us here this morning. Management, senior management of staff members, shareholders, customers, members online, a special welcome. In keeping with the true spirit of Stanley French and what he stood for, I think for the first time we have the students of secondary schools with us this morning. A special welcome. I think your presence here this morning certainly reflect what Stanley French stood for the minority shareholders. So we hope at least you'll use that opportunity to build on that level of success and here this morning. It is certainly a pleasure and a privilege for me to welcome you here this morning to what I call the 7th Stanley French Educational Forum, the 7th. And it is particularly interesting that we have two distinguished St. Lucians delivering with us this morning in the name of Dr. Jules and Mistress St. Rose. Two St. Lucians who have made the community of St. Lucia proud. They both serve regionally and internationally. So what an honor for them to be with us this morning. Stanley French stood on the pillars for minority shareholders and a voice for the minority shareholders. His advocacy at the annual general meetings, especially with all the public companies in St. Lucia. And once a meeting was completed, the next day he started preparing for the next annual general meeting. And by virtue of his presence, his advocacy at the annual general meeting, it is certainly a privilege for First National Bank to have the educational forum named after Stanley French. We particularly like to say thank you to his widow, Eileen French, who now resides in Canada, who gave us the permission to use his name for the forum. I ask that you participate fully. You ask your questions to Dr. Jules and Mrs. St. Rose in the manner that Stanley French would certainly ask them questions. Feel comfortable, feel free, do not be shy, do not think any question you have is not relevant. I have no doubt Dr. Jules and Mrs. St. Rose would do justice to your questions. In the true spirit of Stanley French, he would like to ensure that we develop, we grow, especially in corporate governance. Once again, welcome. Thank you for coming. I can say we have almost a pack hall despite the weather. So the high commitment shown by everybody here this morning is appreciative by the Board of Directors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as the show continues, it would be most appropriate of me to, just say something about that gentleman, Stanley Albert French. Stanley was born right here in Castries in 1937. He attended the Methodist Primary School and St. Mary's College. He was a graduate in civil engineering from Northwood Technical College and West Ham College of Technology at the University of London. That was in 1962. The students are here with us, so I need to say something about his academic and professional discipline, not only as an engineer, but we'll come into some other areas that he particularly shared. On leaving England, he spent 9 years working with the government of Jamaica. And he did a stint in St. Lucia with what was now WASCO, what is now known as WASCO, before, of course, taking up an appointment with the Caribbean Development Bank in Barbados. He stayed there for 19 years. During his time in London, he was exposed to international literature, theater, and modern and traditional London cinema. He was a Caribbean intellectual hub, including writers. He met all those writers grappling with issues of Caribbean development. His exposure to that world shaped his character and his intellectual formation in the study of politics, the arts, and the physical sciences. However, his attraction to theater began a lot earlier, after he saw a St. Lucia Arts Guild performance of Derek Walcott. That play was The Sea of Dauphin in the mid-50s. This production was directed by Roderick Walcott, Derek's brother, and This determined French's lifelong interest in grappling with the craft of playwriting. So Mr. French wrote his first play, and that was entitled The Rape of Fair Helen in 1962. And he followed this up with some other memorable scripts which have been staged in the Caribbean, London, and as far back as Nigeria and Africa. In 2000, he was awarded the St. Lucia Medal of Merit, Gold, in recognition of his contribution to the literary and performing arts of St. Lucia. Cricket was another passion of his lifelong passions. He published an essay entitled Francis Mindu Philip, A Portrait from Memory, and another essay on cricket entitled Come In, My Lords, Come In. Having wide-ranging interests, not confined only to cricket, the arts, and his professional life, he added another dimension, that of corporate governance. This interest began while he worked at CDB and increased on his return to St. Lucia in 1998. To be honest, that is when I met the man. Some of his writings reflected issues of corporate governance, and as a shareholder of the institution in which he had a devout interest, he made a substantial contribution toward the continued development and growth of a number of local institutions. His interest on educating the shareholder encouraged these institutions to actually mount seminars tailored to shareholder rights. In effect, his cause was for the enlightenment of shareholders, particularly the minority shareholders. He was a firm believer in education, and it manifested itself in every aspect of his life. Consequently, the bank was pleased to recognize the contribution by renaming the Shareholder Education Forum the Stanley French Shareholder Forum. Stanley French departed this life on November 10, 2010. So that was particularly a little bit on Stanley Albert French. So we're moving on with the program, and with a little haste, I want to move quickly into introducing our prime speaker today, Dr. Didacus Jules. And without further ado, I want to call on our first Vice President, Mrs. Geraldine Lendo Gabriel, to make the introduction. Mrs. Gabriel, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I will adopt the protocol which has already been established, and I want to say to Dr. Jules that I'm indeed quite pleased to be the one introducing you at this forum. You are indeed an illustrious son of the soil, and your presence here today is not something which it is a very important process, a very important decision that we've taken to allow you to speak to us at such a critical time in the bank's history. You are a passionate educator, and you not only have done extensive work in education, but one of the things that persons may not be aware is that His Excellency, Dr. Didacus Jules, did very early work, including pioneering literacy work in the prisons in St. Lucia and the Eastern Caribbean. He was a principal actor in the National Literacy Campaign in Grenada during the Revolution of 1979. He later served simultaneously as Chief Education Officer and Permanent Secretary of Education, Youth Culture, Women Affairs in Grenada. He served on the International Journal of African and African American Studies editorial group. Following the demise of the revolution, he served as an educational consultant, helping to establish mass literacy programs in St. Lucia, Dominica, St. Vincent, and other parts of the Caribbean. His Excellency, Dr. Didacus Jules, also has worked internationally with multinational agencies such as CEDA, the World Bank, and also assisted the African National Congress in developing adult education programs for many groups. Dr. Jules served as Permanent Secretary for Education and Human Resource Development in the Ministry of Education, Human Resource Development, Youth and Sports in St. Lucia from 1997 to 2004. He also served as the Vice President, Human Resource for Cable and Wireless St. Lucia between 2005 and 2008. Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Human Resource Development in St. Lucia, 1997 to 2008. Dr. Jules not only has extensive regional and international experience in the area of education and human resource development, but he also served as the Registrar and Chief Education Officer of the Caribbean Examination Council's 2008 to 2014, and during that era, he led a very impressive modernization process for the Caribbean Examination Council. Dr. Jules currently serves as the Director General of the OECS. He took on this important role in May of 2014. He has effectively driven the regional integration first towards a single economic and social space, which involves 10 Eastern Caribbean states. Dr. Jules' effort in the area of sustainable development is very, very clear. We can actually see that having taken on the role as Director General of the OECS, his ability to put the issue of sustainable development on the agenda, both at the national, regional, and international level, is very clear. I want to take the time to also recognize a very important initiative that Dr. Jules led at a point when consultancy was seen as something which was done by persons from outside. And Dr. Jules came in and established a consultancy firm. As a young person, I was wondering what Dr. Jules was doing. But today, as I stand here, I can say to you that that was indeed pioneering work. He understood that he had a contribution to make. He understood that he could make that contribution. And in that form, by having established that consulting firm, he actually created something which we had never seen. And I believe, in my view, he pioneered the establishment of a consulting firm as an independent consultant, driving a process of national development. Dr. Jules holds a BA from the University of the West Indies, Cayville, an MSc in Curriculum and Instruction, a PhD in Educational Policy and Curriculum and Instruction from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, as well as an MBA from the University of the West Indies. What others have not known as well, Dr. Jules was very involved in a lot of the pioneering work which was done at the level of the Folk Research Center to put the Creole language and our culture at the forefront of our development. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that we have a lot to be educated about. I know that we have a lot of cultural changes that can take place. So I invite you to listen to Dr. Jules and participate. I thank you.
So now it gives me great pleasure to ask Dr. Jules to come to the mic. Dr. Didacus Jules.
Good morning, everyone. Chairman of the Board of Directors, Mr. Nigel Fulgence, First VP, Geraldine Lendor Gabriel, Second Vice President and Director Moplezi, other board members, second guest speaker, Ms. Andrea St. Rose, esteemed shareholders, customers, Sir Dennis Byron, other esteemed guests, shareholders and customers, Managing Director of the First National Bank, Mr. Fletcher St. Jean and his wife, executive management team and staff, students, most especially of the three secondary schools, Leon Hess, Anthropo, Castries Comprehensive, and importantly, my dear wife, Michelle. Today, I join with you to celebrate and recount the inspiring journey of the First National Bank of St. Lucia, a venerable institution that through perseverance and strategic vision morphed from a modest penny bank into a billion-dollar enterprise. I also wish to pay tribute to the late Stanley French, a friend of mine, in whose honor this lecture series is named. Stanley, as we heard from previous remarks, has been passionate about the origin and purpose of the penny bank, and his labor of love, I'm not sure whether he did complete it before his passing, was the writing of a history of the bank. I learned a great deal about the First National Bank from Stanley. I'm not a historian, so my purpose here is not to recount the narrative of that journey, but to extract the lessons of your journey and the contextual markers from its entrepreneurial DNA that can be a guide to the future. So let me begin by situating the story of the First National Bank in its historical context. Our journey begins in the oppressive climate of British colonial domination of St. Lucia in the turbulent era of the 1930s. Let's take a journey, and I invite you to come with me to the decade of the 30s, a period of Great Depression, which led to workplace disturbance, strikes, riots across the British West Indies between 1934 and 1939. These were harrowing times for the black masses of the British West Indies. St. Lucia was still under British colonial rule. Its socio-economic landscape was largely shaped by the legacy of slavery and the production of sugarcane, which remained the backbone of its economy. The living conditions of the masses, largely descendants of African slaves, were challenging. The economy was dominated by a few white planters who owned most of the arable land. The plantations were the primary source of employment, but were notorious for their poor working conditions and low wages. The sugar monoculture of the island made the island vulnerable to fluctuations in global sugar prices, leading to economic instability that directly affected the livelihood of laborers. Socio-economic stratification could be better classified as socio-economic strangulation because the opportunities for social and economic mobility were very limited. The class structure was defined by a distinct racial hierarchy with a small white elite at the top, a mixed race middle class, and predominantly black working class at the bottom. Social mobility for the black majority was severely limited by racial discrimination and a lack of educational opportunity. Living conditions were the slow grind of poverty. The majority of St. Lucians lived in rudimentary, overcrowded housing, often, especially in the case of rural residents, without access to basic sanitation or reliable clean water. Access to healthcare was limited with high incidences of malnutrition and tropical diseases such as malaria and bilharzia. Few children had access to education, with schooling often reserved for the middle and upper classes. Literacy rates were low among the working class. And critically, the political franchise was limited to the property class, the local elite, and the colonial administration. The majority of the population did not have the right to vote. In the sweltering heat of this oppression, The period was marked by the struggle for rights and better living and working conditions, setting the stage for the later decolonization movement and the eventual path to independence for St. Lucia. It was also a period in which banking was the privilege of the colonial elite. The economy was subordinated to the enrichment of the empire, and its commanding heights were controlled by white expatriates. Nowhere was this more clearly illustrated than in the banking and financial sector. Barclays Bank was the principal financial instrument of the empire. I was able to find here an instrument, a financial instrument that actually was issued in St. Lucia. Barclays Bank was the principal financial instrument of the empire, capitalizing its trade. In fact, the individuals who were involved in predecessor banks that merged to form Barclays were complicit in the slave trade. And it reinforced through financial exclusion of the ordinary citizen the economic hegemony of the colonial elite. In 1938, the political and social upheavals of that decade were the birth pangs of a nascent nationalism. Enter stage left a modest financial institution, the St. Lucia Cooperative Bank, which was appropriately called the penny bank. It was the first indigenous bank, and it accepted deposits of a penny, 2 cents. The names of the boards of directors of the bank will be familiar to many, for these were visionaries who left an indelible mark on commerce and development of St. Lucia. George Palmer, the first president, J.D. Osborne, secretary manager, Clive Beaubrun, J.Q. Charles, Joseph DeVoe, John H. Pilgrim, and Alan Lewis, company solicitor. The bank started with a capital of $50,000 made up of shares of $1 each. As a small savings and loans organization, the bank stood as a pioneer and an innovator in realizing the potential of seemingly insignificant deposits towards the encouragement of thrift. Can you imagine the incomparable sense of pride, the feeling of inclusion, and personal financial empowerment of the first-time depositors from the underpaid black working class? I imagine the feeling would have been akin to the expression by the Cuban poet Nicolas Guillen in his poem Tango, I Have. And it says, when I look at myself and touch myself, I, John only yesterday with nothing, and today, and John with everything today, I glance around, I look and see, and touch myself and wonder how it could have happened. Unfortunately, in our education tradition, we often parrot some reductionist facts as mantras that do not adequately convey the complexity of the reality that is so conveniently summarized. You know, like children in school, and I'm sure many of us of my age would have been through this, we are taught St. Lucia has been 7 times British and 7 times French. A reductionist phrase that does not in any way convey the intensity of the imperial contestation that occurred over this small island. That does not explain why it was of such military and strategic importance or value to the French and British empires. And that completely leaves out the painful narrative of the enslaved black and indigenous population caught between two, not lovers, but warriors. So let's put the idea of a penny bank in proper historical perspective. In 1938, the minimum deposit of a penny, 2 cents, using rough estimates of historical data, would in today's currency be between £1, that is 330 EC, and £4, $13.19 in today's currency. These simple figures encode the revolution in financial inclusion that the penny bank initiated. Ask yourself, in today's climate of de-risking, the stringent know your customer rights requirements, and the many punitive fees being charged for every transaction, how many banks would accept a new customer with an initial deposit between $3 and $13? With one foreign bank, unnamed, charging $25 a month just for maintaining an account, one can understand how a Malawi with the capacity to deposit between $25 or even $100 per month is disadvantaged in the banking system, because rather than appreciate, their funds will be severely depreciated by the $25 monthly fee deduction. In fact, in 4 months, $100 would disappear. You have no account. Today, First National Bank requires, in contrast, a $25 minimum deposit to open an account and charges a maintenance fee of $2 versus the $25 of the foreign bank for maintenance. The creation of this bank was therefore not just a financial venture, but a catalyst for social transformation, enabling individuals, many from humble beginnings, to dream, save, and aspire to a prosperous future. In its early days, the penny bank played an instrumental role in ushering financial inclusion to the residents of St. Lucia. With merely pennies and small dollar amounts, it helped lay the building blocks of economic participation for the average citizen. It didn't just hold money, it safeguarded hopes, aspirations, and the potential for a more robust communal economic future. The seeds that were sown through these small financial gestures began to sprout, and with it the bank's growth was propelled, not just in terms of assets, but also in its reach and its impact in the community. The penny bank began transforming into an entity that stood for stability and progress amid socioeconomic fluctuations. Transitioning from a penny bank into a full-fledged financial institution, the First National Bank embraced the values of innovation, customer service, and most significantly, fostering national development. The bank started integrating more services into its portfolio, from simple savings and loans to complex financial products and solutions that catered to a wide array of customers, from individuals to large corporations. As the bank navigated through the decades, it witnessed the ebb and flow of various economic climates. There were undoubtedly periods of strife, economic downturns, and the challenges that tested the resilience and adaptability of the institution. And yet, the First National Bank, driven by a deep-seated commitment to its people and country, weathered the storms, turning obstacles into opportunities for growth and learning. Fast forward to the technological era. The bank embraced the digital wave, ensuring it remained relevant and continued to service customers with efficiency and innovation. By adopting technology, it expanded its reach, provided unparalleled convenience to its customers, and streamlined its operations, thereby solidifying its position as a dominant player in the region's financial sector. And I can personally attest to that because I've never set foot in the headquarters of the First National Bank, but I can check my account on your mobile app. Today, First National Bank of St. Lucia stands tall, not just as a billion-dollar enterprise, but as a testament to what vision, dedication, and an unwavering belief in collective growth can achieve. From its humble beginnings as a penny bank to becoming an economic pillar in St. Lucia and the wider Caribbean, the bank has not just witnessed, but actively participated and shaped the economic evolution of our nation. The bank's journey is intertwined with the development challenges and triumphs of the people it serves, from facilitating the dreams of small entrepreneurs to supporting large-scale projects that boost national development. The bank has been more than just a financial institution. It has been a partner in progress, a stalwart supporter of dreams, and a catalyst for transformative economic change. But what about the future? tomorrow will be as challenging as yesterday. The state of uncertainty in today's world, global strife, wars everywhere, climate change, the succession of crises, is already presenting and portending a future that will require some deep strategic thinking, emerging from a profound understanding of the realities of this historical time. The ECCB and the OECS Commission jointly commissioned a survey of financial literacy and financial inclusion, and shortly that will be publicly available on both websites. Through the World Bank's, our project with the World Bank on Caribbean digital transformation. And it involves 7,037 individuals, 18 years and older, in the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, which sheds informative light on the current reality. And in this post-COVID, we're not sure, reality, there are some worrying elements. And let me quote two sections of this. One, over half of the individuals in the ECCU, the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, indicated that they were not able to meet their living costs in the past 12 months. Further, over 2 in 5 individuals, 43.9%, indicated that they will not be able to face a major expense today without borrowing from a financial institution or asking family or friends to help. However, to make ends meet, nearly half of the individuals surveyed cut back on spending, spent less, did without, or delayed a planned expense. Individuals also drew down on their savings or transferred funds from savings to checking account, worked overtime, asked for help, or sold something that they owned. The second quotation, across the ECCU, 24.4% of respondents turned to friends or family for assistance to save or borrow. The highest proportion involved in this practice is seen in Dominica, 33.8%, followed by Grenada, 26.4%, and St. Lucia, 25.2%. Let me let that sink in. What then do these times require of indigenous financial institutions, whether they be bank or credit union? One, extending and retaining trust. What's happening here? Okay, extending and retaining trust is a #1 requirement in this period. Ultimately, banking is trust. Trust your banker, because your hard-earned today and your uncertain tomorrow is trusted to them. Trust by our barefooted grandparents is what brought in their pennies and which provided the capital that helped to create an indigenous class of entrepreneurs. And this also led to trust in the integrity of this institution. While every bank must be profitable and give returns to its investors, the trust of its depositors is its greatest asset. The history of this bank attests to that. Financial inclusion for the ambitious poor, who were frugal in the face of want, and a pathway for a capital accumulation for economic nationalists. Second thing, employee satisfaction, motivation, and commitment are the frontline bulwarks for building and retaining that incalculable deposit of trust. Consciousness of the history of the bank, of this bank, and its contribution to post-colonial nation building should inspire staff to uphold and extend this tradition. Every employee should exude pride and a sense of purpose, and it is the responsibility of management to cultivate that environment, no matter how tough the circumstances. The third requirement of these times is the technical challenge of building the financial resilience of the institution. So critical is this third element, I would like to quickly end by scanning 6 key requirements. One, the diversification of portfolios to spread by supporting a range of sectors. And the bank must be commended for its acquisition of foreign bank assets and its expansion within the OECS Economic Union. You've moved into St. Vincent and I believe some other location. This is a real amplification of the dream of the founders, that we become the masters and the owners of our own space. As Director General of the OECS, one of the things that I'm very passionate about is that we cannot establish the single economic space in the OECS for it to be dominated and owned by foreign financial and business interests. Secondly, building microfinance or providing microfinance to MSMEs, micro and small and medium-sized enterprises, consistent with its historical origin to build economic inclusion. Because in the OECS, 70% of employment is generated by MSMEs. Thirdly, disaster risk financing that is responsive and proactive in the face of the increasing vulnerability of our region by working with institutions like the Caribbean Catastrophic Risk Insurance Facility, which offers parametric insurance. And by the way, most people don't know that CRIF was the first multi-country risk pool in the world and was the first insurance instrument to successfully develop parametric policies backed by both traditional and capital markets. This is a Caribbean innovation, and they've now gone international. And incidentally, it is led by Anthony Isaac, a former Secretary of Finance in St. Lucia. Then there's the need to extend digital financial services by popularizing this effective mobile banking app, which I personally attested to, incorporating the ECCB Dcash and making it cheaper and easier for receipt of remittances. Let me repeat that, making it easier for receipt of remittances, cheaper and easier by offering direct transfer alternatives to the exploitative money transfer agencies and the fast cash traps that lure the financially illiterate into debt servitude. I have to restrain myself as Director General of the OECS not to open a war with these agencies, because there was one that called me recently saying they had this brilliant idea to provide support to farmers in the face of our food insecurity at this time. And the idea was to offer fast cash to the farmers. Of course, the natural question was, what's the interest rate? And I don't want to say the interest rate yet, but my reaction to him was that you are not helping farmers. You are, in fact, at the worst possible time when farmers most need the support, seeking to transfer the wealth from the farmers to yourselves. And I said I would publicly come out against this thing if it was launched, so stay tuned. Then there's the adoption of sustainable banking practices that includes environmental, social, and governance factors, popularly known as ESG, in the financing of business. And that is really critical if you're going to look at international climate change funds, other new sources of capital, in order to help sustain and expand the capacity of the bank. And lastly, cooperation with ECCB to maintain adequate levels of foreign reserves and ensure liquidity to support currency stability. I would also add, just as it occurs to me, maybe even developing some strategic partnership with the cooperatives in the OECS as well, so that indigenous institutions, even while they compete, also cooperate to maintain some hegemony in the financial space. The future racing towards that will require a spirit of resilience, innovation, and an unwavering commitment to fostering socioeconomic development. Our compass must remain aligned to the core principles that birth this extraordinary institution. Economic empowerment through financial inclusion of the disenfranchised, lifting ourselves by our own bootstraps, and becoming an economic engine of national advancement and development, and I would add regional advancement and development. As we cherish our rich history, let us step into the future with renewed vigor, ensuring that the First National Bank of St. Lucia continues to be a beacon of stability, growth, and prosperity for all. May the chapters ahead be even more remarkable, and may our shared journey continue to inspire generations to come. I thank you. Merci à peu.
Very, very inspiring. I'll be honest with you, if Stanley was here today, he'd feel very proud. In fact, I would want to recommend later to the board that we can document that lecture that you have presented to us, Dr. Jules, because some years ago, we actually had a little brochure, prepared, of course, by under direction of our first VP. She chaired a educational outreach working group, and in which she had Mrs. Gill, she had Aletta, you remember that, and Barbara Shalmine, Percival Bosolai, and Mr. Harvey. So for those students, particularly who are here, I want to urge you to look for this booklet on our history. It tells you everything. Background information about the bank, products and services, why to do business with us, the beginning, importantly the pioneers, the founding fathers, presidents of the board. It even has a contribution by former Prime Minister, the late John Compton, and very useful information. So I urge you, please, to follow up on what Dr. Jules just shared with us. See if you can get a copy of that brochure. At this stage, what I want to do, with your permission, Chair, is to at least, should we now entertain questions from Dr. Jules, and I would like to invite him, Dr. Jules, perhaps if you can move into the chair that we have provided there for your. And there's also a mic.
Yeah, while he transitions, where is this available?
You can get a copy of our history. It is available through the PR department, right? We circulated it some time back. Yes, Dr. Jules just recommended something very, very useful. We can put it online, and some of you, I want to refer to you to remind you that we also have a website. And incidentally, I just need to tell you that recognize two of our directors. Director Thomas Francis is online, and I need to recommend to acknowledge as well Director Augusto Digaso. Director Digaso is here with us. Very well. We can't leave out our directors. And yes, I think I did mention the presence of Sir Dennis. Yeah. Let me see who else I forgot. Anyway, we move on. One of the things that I want to perhaps tickle Dr. Jules a little bit about, and we have a question from Miss Glass. No? Oh, all right. Don't feel anyway. Be free to drop any question on Dr. Jules. Dr. Jules gave that thing a very passionate lecture, and I would want him to share something more with us. So, Mr. Harvey is here. Yes, yes. Because we're online, and we actually sharing this thing with persons out there, especially in St. Vincent. You remember that we disclosed that we now have the first national bank in St. Vincent?
Yeah.
Right. Mr. Harvey.
Honored guest speaker and my former student.
Honored teacher.
You learned well.
Members of the board and fellow shareholders, today for me is a fantastic day. Stanley French was also my close friend and relative of my wife, first cousins. This bank, you know, stands like a beacon light within the Caribbean because its beginnings precede the Moyne Commission. The Moyne Commission was the first British institution to recommend banking for the newly freed people of the Caribbean. And that was somewhere like 1940 after the riots. So we must hold this treasure and build it and make it fit into the new technology and the new age. It is a tribute, and we must teach the children about it so that they will carry on the legacy. When I think of it, this bank and the OECS, you know, are among some of the very tangible fruits of development in the Eastern Caribbean. And we are proud to have had St. Lucians who have pioneered and developed these institutions. I wish you all the best, Mr. Secretary General. One of the things I would like to see the OECS foster is the amalgamation of security forces within the sub-region so as to help to combat the wave of crime and violence. But keep up the good work and let us support the bank and benefit from all the fruits that the bank is able to bring to us with trust and innovation. Thank you.
That was Mr. Harvey. Thank you very much, Mr. Harvey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harvey. Teacher Harvey, sorry. And there's a saying that half of who we are, we make, the other half of us is made by our friends, family, and those who love us. And I have to pay tribute to Mr. Harvey for his contribution to my own development. Just anecdotally, Mr. Harvey always fostered a lot of debate at A-level history among us. And when we were doing, at the time it was A-levels with English history, and we were very caught up in the salacious details of Henry VIII and his wives and why he was appropriating the property of the church, because he wanted to have many wives in succession. And I distinctly recall, all of us remember that Mr. Harvey said, gentlemen, don't look at the salacious details, look to the economy. Henry VIII was not about just changing wives, he was about aggregating the wealth of the church under the crown. And that put a whole different perspective on the history for us.
Thank you. So, Ms. Deborah Glass?
Start with a little story. I walked into First National Bank at Rodney Bay, and there was this distressed lady, older lady, couldn't figure out what was going on. And eventually she got up and walked out and said she's going to the beach to get some sand to make a cough to put her money in, because she could not deal with what was going on. That was First National Bank. Now, our indigenous bank, and I know we have all of these rules to go by, FIAs on everybody's back, and it is making life extremely difficult for all, in particular the older persons. Now, this is our bank, this is our country, these are our people. How are we making life easier for these older folks? And not just the older folks, there's some of us who really have this phobia with IT, I mean, it is life, and that's what we have to deal with. But we have to get a way around this, because the older folks are suffering. Because I have clients who come to me, I've had it on more than one occasion, where people come and they have to give their grandchild or some neighbor their PIN number to go to the bank. And when they go to the bank to check their accounts, of course, it's depleted. We have to be able to help out these older folks. Forget about it, because if you call or you go to the bank, they'll tell you go online. It's happened to me, and it's very frustrating. We have to be able to help out these older folks.
Yeah. I think you're quite correct about that, Debbie. There are two forces driving this. One is the post-COVID reality, because remember, after when COVID hit, everything was shut down. So we were forced to go online, love it, like it, or hate it. We had to go online. Of course, there was a limitation of capability. Some people just can't deal with the technology. The other side to that is the fact that technology is here to stay, and it's going to be a permanent feature of life going forward. I spoke in the remarks about the importance of deep strategic thinking, and that involves not just forecasting the future and seeing how we get on board and ride the waves of the future, but more importantly, how do we take care of those who fall behind in the present? And again, consistent with the whole inspiration of this bank, financial exclusion cannot be allowed in an institution like this. So the easy suggestion to that, and that's something too that the banks have to be very careful about. A lot of the foreign banks now are moving straight towards, they actually downsizing their physical presence, and everything is online. The challenge with that is that these people are being left behind. The role of the indigenous banks, especially this bank, given its history, would be to have a special facility available for the elderly, the disabled, so that those persons can have the assistance and the access. Now think of it this way. Using that mixed model of online banking, so people like myself can do all like I said, I never set foot into the bank, I can do all what I need. And then the poor person, the illiterate person, those who are not familiar with the technology, being able to come into the bank, it means that there's less pressure on your physical facility to handle 1,000 people coming in. So you have more time to spend with the customers who really need help. So an opportunity for more customized banking, a better relationship, a more intimate relationship with those who otherwise would have been marginalized. And that's really critical, I think, for the image of the bank and bearing in mind the history of the bank.
But before I move on to that, I just want to share something with you. In fact, one of the few banks within St. Lucia that has an ambassador on board. So, MD, perhaps you can just tell them that what facility we have to facilitate persons that Deborah is talking about. Quick.
Thank you, Director Tables. I wanted to add actually to what Dr. Jules would have said, and the question posed by shareholder here. So I think I submitted a paper to the board a couple of months ago regarding the same matter. While we might think that the move is to complete digitization, a few months ago I did some research, and what the move now is, customers, just like you just said, internationally, are demanding a level of personalized service. And just as you said, the older customers, the more mature customers, we have to ensure that we're not fully moving towards digitization. Well, let me rephrase that. While we are moving towards digitization, we must ensure that we have a personal level of service for, customers like, Ms. Glass would have just mentioned, and that's what we are ensuring that we keep, at First National Bank.
Yeah, great stuff. If I can add something more to what you've just said, because it occurs to me, let's look at what has happened since COVID. A lot of businesses have gone into delivery of things, right? So, I spoke earlier about people, the bank, the physical facilities being more open and accessible. But then coming to think of it, there are also people who would find it difficult. Their mobility is limited and so on. They may be partially blind and so on. Is there a way that the bank can deliver its services to those persons? So maybe you have, for example, a couple of employees who are like traveling officers, traveling service officers of the bank, who can go to Miss Brown and Miss Jane once a month just to handle their banking needs. They need a certain amount of cash, they need certain things done to do it. And I hope I'm not shot down by other persons in my economic status, but I mean, even putting $1 on the charge of our accounts in order to provide that service to those persons, I think would be worth it.
Okay. Tell us a little more.
At First National Bank, the personal touch matters. And being a community bank that we are, we do have a group of personnel who are quite capable doing the due diligence to go out, to reach out to those clients who are unavailable or incapacitated to get their transactions done. So the due diligence would be done prior to going out to them. We would ensure that 2 officers go in at the same time, right? Because we have one who conducts the transaction and one who witnesses as well, right? And in turn, the individuals would come back to the institution, complete the transaction, and deliver accordingly. So we create this personal touch to our clients, and this is available.
But you need to make that public, because I'm sure if you publicize that in a serious way, then the other banks would have to close.
Definitely. I note it. We do need to make it public. Thank you very much.
Okay. Identify yourself, my lady. Come to the mic.
Hi, good day everyone. My name is Suzette Merrill. I'm the founder and owner of Caribbean User Experience. Excuse my voice. I think I've engaged and interacted with First National Bank on an introductory level with Mr. Jia. So I think they've probably had some of my proposal and service profile. I'm interested in human experiences. I think Dr. Jules, I probably engaged you on that level as well, with the OECS. So in essence, I am a user experience analyst and transitionist. So some of the very same things that you are speaking about is within my framework when it comes to customer experience as opposed to customer service. Is more transactional than you having an experience from the time I lift up my phone to engage your business till the end point of actually being satisfied with whatever need or problem that I desire to be solved. I look at all of these elements, more or less the journey. So I was very intrigued by your presentation, which speaks holistically or from a very macro level on the transition of the bank from years ago to present. But I think one of the very things that are missing in most of our businesses, and I'm not taking myself out of the picture, is the micro, smaller detail elements of service offering. Sometimes when we look at things in a very macro way, we seem to miss out on the fact that most things are compartmentalized or within silos. And this is one of the very main problems we have in businesses. And I'll give just a simple situation. If one person who holds institutional memory within a certain ambit of the organization goes away for 3 weeks, customers will probably be told, oh, nothing can happen until that person comes back. We have these little problems. If I call your workplace and you've gravitated to a digital replacement of somebody who would typically answer a phone. We had PBX before, remember, switchboard. Yeah, and now, yes, and then now we have migrated to this digital representation, AI. Let's make that shift. I have this voice that's telling me that it cannot recognize my my name because of my accent. Okay, so I have to repeat myself 10 times. Now, let's say I'm not a St. Lucian and there's somebody else who's trying to engage that business. That's frustrating because I found myself having to do that about 10 to 20 times, and I purposely did that consistently to see how many times they'll ask me to repeat my name. And if not, I'll have to start all over again. And that means I have not even contacted or spoken to any real person at that point. So imagine somebody who's trying to engage your business, and that is the first experience you are having. So my business deals with those from inception end to end. And these are the small micro elements we need to concentrate on, not just the big picture, because this is what determines whether customers remain with an entity. Most times they don't tell you, and that's the other factor, is that you have no idea what was the reason that they may have left if we do not improve the means by which we communicate with our audience. So I just wanted to...
Yeah, you're quite right, Suzette. The devil is always in the details, and it requires that the bank be constantly, whether surveying or by some means, you really need to segment and understand your customer base, and in very empirical terms. So, for example, does the bank have a sense of the age profile of its customer base? And does it understand maybe their physical mobility constraints? So that you know exactly what segments there are that need what type of service, so that the service can be customized, as you were pointing out.
Don't feel shy, come through. Come through, Debbie.
Maybe you say
I'm wondering if First National Bank, as the indigenous bank, has any leeway in going around those FIA rules. The legislation is there. I know it's for everybody, because when I complain, I'm saying it's not just us, everybody has to do it. But our culture, our people, we have to cater to them. We have to make them comfortable with banking, with what they're doing. I know it looks like we're trying to move away from using cash, and people feel comfortable with money in their hands. I know people who still want to walk around with wads of paper in their wallet. We have to do something. And because the legislation is there and everybody has to take it wholesale. You can't get around it because it's there for everybody. Why are we marching to every drumbeat of international financing?
Because there's something called the international financial system. And you can jump high or jump low, that's what it is. But the googly you bowl in there, I will pass it to Mrs. Cedros.
All right, okay,
Let me just finish the point, who's best able to deal with it. However, maybe there might be room for some latitude in that, because you know that SWIFT system is what enables the multinational financial system to have that chokehold on us. Everything goes through SWIFT, and therefore the US controls it. When they want to put sanctions, it's easy to apply sanctions. We have, I believe, and that's something that we need to be explored more carefully. But I'm sure everyone here would have heard of the rapprochement with Africa, the Afrexim Bank. The OECS was all of the OECS member states have signed on to that partnership with Africa. And the OECS Commission signed up to two critical platforms of the Afrexim Bank. One is called PAPS. It's a payment system that enables you to do transactions in your national currency. So we could be doing business with a Zimbabwean company, and they do their end of the bargain paying in Zimbabwean dollars, notwithstanding the huge inflation rates. We do our payments in EC dollars, and that transfer the transaction is possible then. Otherwise, we would have had to go through the SWIFT system. So there is possible bypass. In fact, I have to use the opportunity to give some credit to Sir Dennis, because he was one of the people who was instrumental in establishing that linkage between the Caribbean and Africa that is now blossoming. There's a $1.3 billion put by a Frexim bank for this, right? The second platform is something called the Mansa platform. And the Mansa platform is named after Mansa Musa, who was one of the most famous African leaders in ancient times. But the Mansa platform is a due diligence platform. So anybody in the OECS or the Caribbean who wants to do business with an African counterpart would register on that platform. That's where we do the due diligence, both of yourself and the African partner. So in that way, we can know that we're dealing with, reputable entities. We were very frank in the discussions with the Afrexim Bank in the initial stages of the agreement to say that unfortunately, some bad eggs have spoiled the impression people have of African business people. So that Mansa platform is critical to restoring integrity and confidence in the partnership between Africa and the Caribbean. So I don't know to what extent, maybe if, Andrea, maybe you might need to, get some more information on that, because that will be critical to the work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jules. Oh, Director, I have to let Director Alfred say something.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Jules, for that presentation. Very insightful. Just to further add to what you have said, and also to Ms. Glass's intervention, we are small fish in a big bowl, essentially. And in my other life with the Attorney General's Chambers, we are responsible for a lot of the legislative changes. But at the end of the day, we don't have much choice as it stands right now. We are currently mandated by the Financial Action Task Force. St. Lucia is currently being reviewed right now. And because of that pressure and the lack of might, in many instances, we are forced to do those legislative changes. So I just wanted to throw that out there, notwithstanding what Dr. Jules has said. Dr. Jules, in relation to your presentation, you indicated earlier, and I think you spoke about research of a group 18 to, I can't remember the age group, 18 and over. And there was a statistic that you read, I think 43% or so, that would have indicated the inability to save, or to have to rely on family members, expenditure issues, etc., etc. And for me, that was startling, in the sense that my first question would be, what does that mean for the financial system? Because if you have such a large percentage of people who are indicating post-COVID, this is our scenario, what does that really mean for the financial system? And you haven't worked with young people for a long time. We have a lot of young people here. What are our prospects in terms of getting them to save, in terms of increasing investments? What does that really mean for us?
Well, I think there are a lot of things that come out of that. One, the need for financial literacy. And in fact, that report that I spoke about, as I said, will be available on both the ECCB and the OECS website. So you'll be able, in a matter of days, you should be able to see it, right? It's not a confidential document. But there are a lot of things that we need to analyze in that. So financial literacy, and also the need to work with young people from now, those secondary school students who are here, to get them into either the credit unions or into the banking sector, and make provision for that. I remember, it's 40 years ago now, how time flies. When I was PS Education in Grenada, we discovered that the schools in Grenada had something like 4 million EC dollars in school credit union arrangements. I mean, that was an astounding figure at the time. And as a result of that, we actually set up a unit in the ministry to promote the credit union movement in the schools, so that the children can get into the habit of, cooperative endeavor and so on. So that's one of the things that need to be done, financial literacy, but also for the bank to look now at some of the other elements I spoke about in the remarks. The need to, how does the bank help small and medium-sized businesses? Because if people are unable, the reason people are, that statistic is so stuck right now is because of the effect of the impact of COVID, the world economic crisis. These things are hitting us in very tangible ways, and that's how it affects individuals. So then the onus there is, how can we shape policies and programs that help these people not to find themselves in a debt trap? And that's why I railed against the fast cash solutions, because when somebody can't meet their bills, then they just go into one of these unnamed entities for the purposes of rectitude. They go into one of these entities and then they just get $5,000 easy cash, no questions asked. They don't know what's coming behind them now because they just keep going deeper and deeper into a cycle of debt. So the challenge is for the bank to think creatively about that, and maybe even have, if you know customers who are in that situation, to convene a discussion with them, a round table where quite confidentially, how can we help you? Or perhaps even the bank have somebody, you have people like Andrea, they are financial consultants who can advise customers, and you can have very private clinics, the same way that I have at the OECS employee welfare program where we have a psychologist who, if staff have personal problems, they can call that person confidentially and be advised. And their families can be advised. The bank can engage some financial and business strategy people to provide that assistance confidentially to people who are experiencing that difficulty.
Thank you. Director Lendo? Quickly. Yes, I'll take you next. Yeah. Okay.
All right, so just in light of keeping with one of the values to which Stanley French held dear, that of incorporating the minority and students, and also in this 7th edition, we have for the first time student representatives. I just wanted to know what are some of the initiatives that the bank has to bring students on board, and what are some of the other things that they can do to get students interested in banking and saving. You touched on financial literacy, but I am wondering, what are some of the other things that can be done to get students interested in the long term to become shareholders and that aspect of it? How do we bring our students on board?
Can I just follow up on this? Because I think the two
Director Lendo
are quite related.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Jules, thanks. Thank you for the whole issue of financial inclusion. Thank you for bringing forward the issue of the interest rates that those institutions. Part of our social exclusion is directly related to those high level of interest rates. One of the things that I have tried, even though as I sit as a director, and there is the fact that we have so many persons engaged in work such as sanitation work, where they earn decent enough income, but they can't move from where they are to the next stage of their lives simply because they lack that capacity and they lack a caring institution which can understand them and not just see them as at the bottom of the society, and therefore there's nothing dedicated to addressing that. If we want to deal with security issues, if we're going to deal with crime, if we're going to deal with all of those social ills, as an indigenous financial institution, the only one, we are duty bound to act beyond the glamour of $1 billion. We must never lose sight of that. And the fact that I sit as a director and I'm not able to push it is an indication that there is some education that must also take place at the level of bankers themselves to understand that, you know, their own sustainability beyond their living, their life as a banker, also depends on dealing with that social exclusion issue. That's number one. And so I think Ms. Victor asked specifically about how do we move that process, which is why I felt that I could just continue on that. But importantly, you made two other very important points that I would like you to expand a little on. That of climate funding and SMEs. I think your presentation has given us some very important strategic areas that we can look to. And so I would like to, if you can expound a little in terms of what directions we can take in those areas. Climate funds
funding
and SMEs.
Okay, on the climate fund, I mean, sometimes, well, this is the sexy thing at the moment. So everybody's into climate funds and everybody's into SMEs. I think there's a bit of a danger in that as well, right, to be honest, because we see a lot of duplication of effort happening at the national level, at the regional level, and at the international level. Everybody is going now for certification so that they can access climate financing. And we have to be careful with that because that rush to the trough can be problematic and it can result in everybody trying to do the same thing and nobody doing it properly. So it is important that the partnerships that we shape are partnerships that enable us to work together to amplify our effort. It means, therefore, that at the national level, we need to ensure that there is least duplication. In fact, just recently, I had discussions with Caribbean Export, a number of agencies, because we have a competitive business unit in Dominica, and they are supposed to be helping MSMEs. We have in the regional space about 3 or 4 CARICOM agencies that are doing the same thing. We have the International Trade Corporation, ITC, that's doing that globally, but they also engage in the region as well. We have a number of UN agencies that are doing this. And the interesting thing is that right now, if you look at the small business space, a lot of people are doing business pitches. So you'll see an ad, greenpreneurs or young entrepreneurs, you can apply for $50,000 or $100,000. And what I begin to notice is happening, there are some people who are become quite savvy at that. So they win a first pitch, they get 50,000. And then you see them applying for every pitch subsequently for 100,000, 150,000. Now, if you're trying to grow a business, as easy as it may be for you to having experience of winning one pitch to prepare and hopefully win subsequent pitches, that's not the best way to grow your business because your business is not growing organically. You're just moving from award to award, right? So you have to, find that pathway. Nevertheless, on the climate change front, it means looking at what are the opportunities because there are, within the whole architecture of climate funding, there are areas where, for example, in banking, you can get access to socially conscious banking entrepreneurs who would be prepared to invest in a bank. So some of the ideas that came up here in our discussion about how you serve the underserved and the vulnerable sectors of your customer base, I'm sure there must be some institution or someone who is tapping climate change funds that can partner with you to get that funding, to make it available. So rather than duplicating, it's really a matter of identifying your niche areas and going for that. One point I wanted to make on another issue, we keep talking about the digital banking thing as if it's really problematic. And admittedly, there are people who will just not be with it and not get with it. But I visited Kenya 2 years ago and spent time, because in Kenya there's a digital banking system, the M-Pesa. And everywhere I went, the M-Pesa was being used. I deliberately went into the marketplace where you'd expect the least educated people to be. And it's amazing how ordinary Kenyans were using the M-Pesa to do their transactions. I went to a mall and I stood with agreement of the cashier. I stood by her while she was doing all the transactions to see how it was being done and the ease with which it is being done. The one down, so the mobile banking is a reality that we cannot, and digital banking, we cannot ignore that. But there's also a downside that has been very, not even raised in a serious way, that I think needs to be brought to attention. What is the value of the mobile dollar? Somebody raised that with me recently, and this is an ordinary citizen. He said, if I have a $10 bill, and I pay the manager that $10 bill, he uses that to buy something in the store. The $10 bill then goes on. So that $10 bill can circulate in this entire room, each of us using it to pay somebody for something. At the end of the day, the last person to receive that $10 bill still has $10 in their hands. So the value never changes of the $10 physical bill. But if I have a $10 in digital currency on my phone, and I pay you that $10, right? What you get $10, but there's a deduction of maybe 50 cents. And then you now take that $9.50 and you pay Geraldine, and then there's a deduction, and so that there's a loss of value in the digital platforms. And that too, you see, technology can also be a trap, because that's where the technology people make their money, right? So the transactions go on. So again, we have to be very strategic. Where is the best opportunity for using digital, and where is the best place to maintain cash?
Okay, so I'll take three more. Because I cannot have Mrs. Andrews waiting too long. Okay, Chair, proceed.
Mr. MC, I was just making a special appeal on behalf of the teachers for the school.
Yes.
I think she has a question. That question should not be directed to Mr. Jules. But as we indicated, we're embracing everybody, so I think we should call upon the managing director to hear what plans the institution have for the students, because the students here must be waiting anxiously to know out of that invitation.
Thank you. And I hope every student, you have a copy of the flyer, MSME, because I want you to go soon to go and set up your little business. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's no surprise that the students are here for the first time for the Stanley French Education Forum, and it was by no accident. Now, that was a good question you asked, Miss
Merrill.
Victor, right.
All right.
So, you know, one of the things that you'll always hear our chairman preach, First National Bank is a community bank, right? We want to be known as a community bank. What does that mean? As an indigenous bank, we want to ensure that we are going into each and every single community. And bringing the students here is a signal that we are going back in the community. We are forming strategic partnerships. Mr. Jules, you would have mentioned partnerships before, and this is something that we want to re-embrace as an indigenous bank, not just with our high schools, but with the primary schools, and also with the community college here as well. So to answer your question, it's no accident that they're here, and we want to ensure that the younger generation is being attached to our indigenous bank here in St. Lucia.
Thank you. Boo?
So here's what.
Go ahead, Boo.
On?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to confess I had a deep dislike for the foreign banks. That's after reading a book called The Color of Money. And I want to advise that most of us get the opportunity to read that book. It speaks to the whole history of the bankings and how we'd be encouraged to put our money into foreign banks. And when we went to borrow, they created a difficulty for us to borrow. And we lend people who don't look like us our money. So I want to advise most of us to read that book.
The Color
But
of Money.
I stand here on behalf of the people who work in the creative industry like myself. And I would like to ask Dr. Jules how it can convince our bank, First National Bank, to take some more chances on those people involved in the creative industry, because we belong to a multi-billion-dollar industry, and there's hardly any institution, or rather it's very difficult for people to work in the creative industry to go to a banking institution to get funding to do anything. And not many young people have succeeded at a level that permits them to operate like others. I'm not referring to myself, right? But here's what. I recall going to what used to be Scotiabank, and I needed $60,000. And I'm sitting there talking to this guy. He tells me, well, we'll take it from your account and we'll use your security. But why would I give you my $60,000? To give me, for me to pay a whole pile of interest. And he's telling me that because I'm a musician, there's more risks. But because I'm a musician, you have my money. But when I want to borrow, you want to take my money to use it as security, hold it there, to lend me $60,000. And that reinforced what I read in the book, The Color of Money. And I would like Dr. Jules to explain to me how I can get into a bank and say, listen, this is my catalog of songs. This is how I've lived my life. This is how I bought my house. This is how I bought my Mercedes. This is how I traveled the world. Can you lend me $500 million on my catalog of songs? Because there's value to it. This happens everywhere else in the world. But the banks here are very reluctant to take any chance on anybody involved in the creative industry, except if you have cash.
Yeah. Well, there are a number of things that you'll be happy to hear about, Boo. First of all, I refer to the partnership with Africa, and I would encourage everybody to follow the Afrexim Bank and also follow the OECS website and CARICOM, because a lot of possibility in there. The orange economy, as we call it, the creative sector, is something that has been very, very undervalued and unappreciated, and I would say even unknown territory to people. Let me give you some simple illustrations of that. Everybody knows Rihanna. Rihanna's net worth is 1.4 billion US dollars.
That was 2 years ago.
Huh?
That was 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's what, yeah, because since then she's done a lot of investment, so the figures are dated. Rihanna is Bajan, little Bajan town girl, no disparagement. The GDP of Barbados is 4.3 billion US dollars. If Rihanna was a currency, 3.5 Riris is equal to the entire economy of Barbados. Rihanna does not need to go to a bank in Barbados. She can buy a bank in Barbados, right? Now that speaks to the power of the creative economy. The question, when Rihanna was 24 years old, she had 35 million followers on Facebook. If Rihanna says to those followers, as she's done before, I'm going to Barbados for crop over, wanna come? And 5% of these people decide they're following Rihanna to Barbados. Barbados will need 3 million hotel rooms to accommodate them. Barbados would sink on 5% of Rihanna's followings coming to Barbados. Now, I'm quoting that for you to show you where we need to think differently about the creative economy. And Mr. MD, you'll be happy to know that with the Afrexim Bank thing, the creative economy is one of the big areas. So when we talk, the question asked earlier about sources of financing to enable some of the things we're talking about, right? Partnership with Africa. We are now shaping a proposal that looks at how can we bring our festivals, aligned festivals. The Afrobeat people are already coming into Dominica for the Dominica Creole Festival. 2/3 of the population of Africa is from the Francophonie Africa. So there's that Creole-French connection. Dominica has a tentative link to that. But there's room to grow that. We've suggested to the government of Dominica, why not continue to have the Creole Festival every year in Dominica And every second year, in addition to the annual thing, you have an African edition where you bring the Creole artists into Dominica, right? When you do that, the opportunities for growth and so on, what it took Rihanna to reach where she reached, it will take any of our creative artists, especially the renowned ones like Boo and so on, it will take them a quarter of that time to make it big, because it's all about the demographics, right? As an artist, what is your popularity? And that can be done easily in Africa. June Frederick has been doing this thing with our masquerades. We're talking now about a masquerade festival between the Caribbean, because in each of the Caribbean islands there are masquerades like the Paibanan and what we have here, and it is an expression of the African connection. So drumming festivals, music festivals, all of these things, getting our artists there, exchanges with them, that is possible. And the Afrexim Bank, working with other banks, can make that happen. The core of the Afrexim Bank possibilities does not lie with governments. It is a private sector. It has to be private sector. If you listen to the meeting that was held in Barbados, you can find it on YouTube. Prime Minister Gonzalez was very clear on that, that the partnership with Africa has to be a private sector-led thing. Governments can do their stuff, but the Afrexim Bank, to their credit, they're not into giving grants and that sort of thing. They are pure business, right? But business that is sustainable and can grow.
I just wanted to add quickly that we are part of a multi-billion-dollar industry, like Dr. Jules has indicated. And this total dependence on tourism can't last for very long. And we cannot develop successive generations of our people to be attending to people who come for frivolity, because that's a mindset that's not good for our people. And therefore, if we can develop the creative industry, we have an industry that is driven by our own human resource, our own human capital, and every successive generation is going to develop it, and it will never go, unlike tourism. So I want to implore the people who can do the financing, particularly my friend here, to have a better look at a more favorable look at the creative industry, for our own sake and for the sake of our young people who want to go into the industry.
Thank you, Boo. Thank you, Boo. Okay, Mr. Boland. Yeah, we'll take only one more question. One more comment, question, or whatever. Go ahead.
Vincent Boland. Let me first of all applaud the bank for this initiative and doing it over the number of years that they have. And thank you, Dr. Jules, for your presentation. You spoke about pooling of risk. You spoke about pooling of funds. The starting of the bank was when they pooled the funds, the $50,000 together to create the bank. You spoke about the Caribbean risk insurance program that's a pooling of risk. We see the entrance of the Trinidad Union, the unit trust out of Trinidad, and they have introduced a mutual fund, which is seeking to have young investors or small investors pooling funds again. Why is it that we as people in the OECS are unable to create our own pooling of funds like that, which will generate the funding needed to support BOO, to support various initiatives, climate change initiatives? That's the question I have for you.
We've met the enemy, sire, and it is us. There's nothing preventing us from doing it.
Is it that we don't have enough intellectual capital for us to be able to say that we ourselves can stand up and put this together to be able to do it?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I mean, we have Sir Arthur Lewis as the apex of our intellectual capital. So it's a matter of deciding that we need to do it. And the persons in the banking sector, like yourself who have experience, are some of the people who need to step forward to begin to shape those things. Unfortunately, part of the cultural reality is that people will say, well, they know Boland, so they don't know unit trust, but then they will sooner perhaps take a foreign offering than a local offering. But again, if it is done through national institutions like this bank that already has its historical profile, it's more acceptable. I don't think, like I said in the remarks, the most important thing that the First National Bank has is the trust factor That is your biggest asset in the bank, right? Because of what it stood for, what led to it, its history, that has to be capitalized in ways that will propel it into the future. And it can be done.
Thank you. And let us not lose focus that Dr. Jules is all part of our 85th year of anniversary. Okay. A round of applause for Dr. Jules. The next item, of course, we want to deal with, sorry we took over an hour, but anyway, Andrea, my apologies. Okay, right. So to introduce Mrs. Centrose, I want to call on Director Moplezi. Director Moplezi is actually the chairman of the Finance Committee, and who more appropriate to do the introduction than Director Moplezi. Director Moplezi, could please come up to the microphone.
Thank you, Teddy. Good morning, everyone. Permit me to adopt the protocol that has already been established. It is indeed an honor for me to introduce Andrea Centrose. Andrea has over 25 years of experience. When I finish introducing her, you will see why I went to the 45. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Andrea has over 25 years experience in the accounting profession and the provision of corporate and business advisory services. She has held senior positions in 2 of the 4 big firms, and in addition to managing a portfolio of audit clients, she has held responsibility for learning and education and was part of the technical team at one of those firms. During 1993 to 1999, she was employed by the largest accounting firm in Jamaica as a senior manager and later served as a director at the largest accounting firm in St. Lucia. Actually, that is when I had the pleasure of meeting Andrea. She was my former manager at one of those firms in St. Lucia. So it's really a pleasure for me to do this introduction. In that capacity, she held responsibility for some of the largest clients of the firm. She brings with her a wealth of experience garnered from the private and public sectors in Jamaica. Although she has specialized in the financial services industry, she has provided assurance, business advisory, taxation, legal and corporate services to many local and regional institutions across a wide spectrum of industries. Andrea is currently a partner at BDO, Eastern Caribbean, an international accounting firm, and heads the taxation and business advisory practice. She is also the head of audit and assurance quality management at that firm. She currently serves as president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of the Caribbean and president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of the Eastern Caribbean. She also serves as a member of an advisory group of the International Accounting Standards, IASB, and advises the IASB on implementation of IFRS 9 of small, medium-sized entities, what we know as SMEs, what Dr. Jules was just very instrumental in talking about in his presentation. In addition to being a chartered accountant, Andrea is an attorney at law, a chartered governance professional, a British accredited civil and commercial mediator, a certified international arbitrator, and a certified fraud examiner. She holds certification in advanced corporate insolvency law from the University of the West Indies and is also certified as a trust and estate practitioner. She is listed by the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court as a court-appointed mediator and has assisted the court with both civil and criminal matters. Additionally, Andrea is a trustee of the Caribbean Court of Justice Trust Fund that was established to finance Caribbean Court of Justice to perpetuity. She is currently the treasurer of the St. Lucia Bar Association. She was called to the bar in England and Wales by the Honourable Society of Inner Temple. Andrea holds a Bachelor of Laws, LLB Honours degree from the University of Wolverhampton in the United Kingdom and a Masters of Business Administration degree from the University of Wales, also in the United Kingdom. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, I present to you Mrs. Andrea St. Rose, who will speak to us today on the ease of doing business.
Do I have to point? Okay. Okay. Yes, thank you. Like those before me, I would like to adopt the protocol that has been established. A few things I'd like to speak to has to do with the whole issue of financial literacy. I advise that for the past 6 or so years, the Institute of Chartered Accountants, on an annual basis, has been holding free of charge presentations and seminars with respect to the whole issue of financial literacy. For that matter, next week, we will be celebrating Accountants Week, and on the 14th of November, you are all invited to a presentation free of charge that is being delivered by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of the Eastern Caribbean. If you listen to the media, you will get some more information with respect to the time and the venue. My role this morning is to speak with you briefly on the whole issue of the ease of doing business within the banking space. So I will not be speaking anything to do with the whole story of the infrastructure, our roads, clearing goods at the ports, etc. The issue of one window, no, we're not speaking about it. We will be speaking solely about the banking space. And of course, many of you would have experienced in the past a certain level of frustration, if I may want to call it that, when dealing with the banks. When trying to open an account, trying to apply for a loan, you just cannot understand why does it take so long for the loan to be processed? Why is the bank asking me all those questions? Who is my mother? Who is my father? Who is my father's father? But there's a reason for that. And I am hoping that after I have gone through with this presentation, you will get a better appreciation as to why is it the bank has to go through all these processes when dealing with you, when establishing an account with you, and the fact that it has reputational risks for St. Lucia as a whole, the country as a whole. So I'm hoping by the end of this presentation, notwithstanding the fact that banks also have to ensure that you have proper customer service arrangements in place, including proper training of your staff in implementing the respective legislation. There's a role for that, because I have had the experience, and it's happening right now, where I manage a particular business. And every time I go to the bank, I am asked to complete a statement of sources of funds. Notwithstanding that all the information is there, background information is there, the source of the funds from day one, it is there, but every time I go. And why? It is simply because there is a lack of understanding of the whole concept of know your customer, know your client. The issue of establishing thresholds so that you know if someone is operating with a particular threshold, there's no need to be asking all those questions. So that aside, we will make the assumption that all of these good things are in place, people are aware of the legislation, etc. And I just speak to some of the issues with respect to the ease of doing business. And to guide the presentation, by the way, I've only been given 30 minutes. It's a pleasure to go through this with you. So I will be quick. I will be looking at the whole issue of de-risking and correspondent banking relationships, the ECCB regulations, and government regulations. And Ms. Glass, I will have the opportunity to address your concerns as well. Okay, so the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business Index ranks countries against each other based on how the regulatory environment is conducive to business. This was discontinued in 2021 for the simple reason that they thought that there were some flaws in the whole system, and it's being revisited, and a new model is being put in place from 2020 to my understanding. And inquires economies with a high rank, say 1 to 20, have simpler and more friendly regulations based on the scoring mechanism. In St. Lucia, in 2029, we were ranked 93 among 190 countries, and this is data from the World Bank. And I am bringing this up just to indicate that we function within a particular environment. So if in an environment where you have a country being ranked 93 out of 190, it will be unusual for the institutions in there to be ranking number 1 in terms of what it is that they're doing, because they need to operate within that particular environment. A report prepared by Statistica.com awarded St. Lucia an average score in May 2019. Getting Credit had the lowest performance. That score was about 63, by the way. Getting Credit had the lowest performance score of 25, with starting a business receiving the best performance score of 89.4. So the whole scoring that was assigned to accessing credit was the lowest in the whole scheme of scoring mechanism that was adopted. This ease of doing business score is reflected on a scale of 0 to 100, where 0 represents the lowest score and 100 represents best performance. So imagine being at 25 on a scale of 0 to 100. That is where it stands with respect to accessing credit. Now we'll speak a little to correspondent banks. And exactly what's a correspondent bank? Well, these banks first facilitates a domestic bank in the processing of transactions in a foreign jurisdiction. It is not possible for, say, First National Bank to have many banks, say, in the US. So they would select one bank where they would establish their bank accounts, and if you need to process a wire transfer, they would transact that activity through that foreign bank. And so they act very much as an intermediary agent between the bank in the sender country and the bank in the receiving country. They facilitate money transfers, trade financing, such as letters of credit, international wire transfers, etc. So here you have it, where you have a foreign bank dealing with transactions from a domestic bank, and they have no information about the customers of that bank. So you can see where they are taking a chance in terms of know your customer principles. Correspondent banking relationships play a critical role in the international trade, particularly for small developing countries like St. Lucia. And for individuals, imagine a world where one cannot conduct a simple transaction such as a credit card payment for overseas purchases. Example, going to Amazon as a result of loss of correspondent banking relationships. So it can affect even the man on the street. The Financial Action Task Force is a global watchdog with respect to money laundering and terrorist financing. And it sets standards and recommendations aimed at fighting such illegal activities. And over 200 countries have committed to comply with the FATF standards, St. Lucia being one of those countries. We also have the Office of Foreign Assets Control, OFAC, and it is a US enforcement agency. And I'm just going through these agencies, etc., to provide the background to the whole issue of doing business. It administers and enforces economic and trade sanctions in support of U.S. national security. It publishes a list of individuals, groups, entities, countries as well, such as terrorists and narcotic traffickers. Now, one of the things banks have to go through, and you can see why it takes such a long time to process transactions. When you have a new customer, in performing your due diligence requirements, you need to ensure that you're not dealing with anyone on this list, right? Because it has serious implications. And in a little while, you'll see some of the fines that have been levied at institutions that were not in compliance with the sanctions requirements. We speak of de-risking. De-risking is used as a tool for mitigating compliance risk. It is a response to large fines imposed by regulators. So some financial institutions have said, you know what? The fees that I'm gaining from engaging in a business relationship with a particular institution is not worth my while because of the potential fines that may be levied. So what they do, they just cut off the banking relationships. And they will give no explanation, in most cases, why that banking relationship has been terminated. And it involves financial institutions closing accounts of clients deemed to be high risk for money laundering or terrorist financing. And I have heard in many quarters that the Caribbean as a whole has been deemed to be a jurisdiction of high risk. So this is something that financial institutions consider when they deal with this jurisdiction. And in 2019, Unit Credit Corp was fined $1.3 billion for violating sanctions rules. In 2023, we had Swedbank Latvia with a fine of $3.4 million. And like I said earlier on, when compared with the fee income generated for processing transactions and entering into these banking relationships, the costs are insignificant. The cost is significant. In the Caribbean, we've had countries that have gone through the de-risking experience. And Belize, between 2015 and 2016, experienced the termination of 2/3 of the corresponding banking relations. And since January 2020, a domestic and an international bank lost their corresponding banking relationship. While some banks have been replaced, there were delays in processing transactions, there are fewer services being offered, and the costs are higher. I experienced some issues when I visited Belize one year where we had an accountants conference and the whole de-risking thing was still in progress. And usually when you go to the hotel, they place a hold on your account, to take care of incidences, etc. And I was told that it would take 2.5 weeks before that hold on my account can be released because of issues they have with the clearing of their accounts. So it can affect you, the person on the street. Then we look at government regulations. To protect the sector from the impact of money laundering risk, the government has responded with laws and regulations. And truth be told, the more we try to put processes and procedures in place to address those things, it's like a moving target. Then there's more being asked, and there's more being asked. In response, we have the Money Laundering Prevention Act, which deals with the laws relating to laundering of funds. We also have the Proceeds of Crime Act, which is the forfeiture and confiscation of the proceeds of certain crimes. We also have the Anti-Terrorism Act that speaks to actions that they would be deemed to be terrorist acts and the manner in which the government is supposed to respond to those. So government has responded with these regulations. Like I said, increasingly, the demands are being met, but they keep asking for more. For examples, previously we had the money services institutions and the financial institutions being regulated for the whole KYC thing. Now it's being said that accountants have to be regulated, lawyers have to be regulated. So when a lawyer comes to you, when you have a simple transaction and they want to get your ID, and you want to get your source of funds and all of that stuff, is because the lawyers are being regulated as well, the accountants are being regulated. And some of you who run businesses, when you have an auditor who's taking up your audit or entering just a simple transaction for accounting, they will ask you, we want information on the directors, on the senior managers, and if you are a politically exposed person, there is something called enhanced due diligence that has to be performed on you. And all of these things have to be documented, because at any point in time, we can have these regulators coming and doing their spot checks. So we also have an issue with legislation. In response to various international organizations, the government has instituted various laws. However, in some cases, there is uncertainty with respect to how we apply this legislation. There is this thing about ultimate beneficial owners. It is a requirement that you must know who is that individual at top, in that whole structure, organizational structure, and not just the company. But what happens when you look at this structure and whoever is at the structure is another company, and another company is another company, and another company, and it goes on like this. So where do you stop? Then you have a situation where the company at the top is really a publicly listed company. Who is the UBO? We do not know. As of now, we do not know how to address that. We also have certainty regarding the application of some laws in some cases. Example, the economic substance legislation, and even the CARICOM Treaty for the avoidance of double taxation. So, for example, you have a subsidiary in St. Vincent. There may be cases where you have transactions between the two subsidiaries that should not be subject to taxes based on the legislation. However, we have differences in interpretation that creates issues for institutions when they come to conduct business. Foreclosure laws. The foreclosure laws can frustrate the asset recovery process, and is a requirement that properties are subject to a public auction, sometimes requiring a minimum of 3 bidders. We now have the Eastern Caribbean Asset Management Corporation that is supposed to step in to help alleviate that problem. But my understanding is that the offer that is being made for the acquisition of some of these loans are so very low that most financial institutions are not prepared to engage them. So what do we have? We have a large portfolios of non-performing loans. And what does this translate to? It translates to large loan loss provisions, which would negatively impact on profits. It is commendable that the laws of St. Lucia are available online. However, the most recent revision is 2020, and subsequent amendments are not reflected. Uncertainty exists as to whether the most up-to-date version of the law is being accessed when arriving at decisions. Then we look at ECCB regulations. There is a minimum capital adequacy ratio that is required. We also have requirements for liquidity, exposure limits, and risk-based requirements. And these are, there's a minimum ratio of 8% of Tier 1 capital over total risk-weighted assets that the financial institutions are required to maintain. There's also a requirement to hold adequate and appropriate forms of liquidity in the event that you have a crisis at the institution. And exposure, there is a limit with respect to the exposure to any one person or group of persons in that it cannot exceed 20% of the capital base. And there are new requirements that will likely increase in an increase in capital requirements for banks based on the newly introduction of Basel II and III, which calls for capital to be set aside to deal with things such as operational risk, things like fraud, IT risk, etc. You need to put funds aside to deal with that. The ECCB has also responded with guidelines with respect to credit risk, and they require as well, the ECCB as well, and not just the FIA, the ECCB requires compliance with the AML, CFT laws and regulations in the jurisdictions. It's a requirement of the central bank. And the central bank would carry out their reviews as well. Extensive requirements have been provided with respect to credit risk management, including the requirement to have stress testing looking at different scenarios that the bank may face. And so we spoke about the risk-based capital requirements, and there's a prudential benchmark that the non-performing loans of the financial institutions to total loans should not exceed 5%. The provisioning requirements has also been revised, and we have a case where you have, in the event that you have a loan that is doubtful, there is a requirement that you need to provide for 100% of that loan. Even in the case where you have securities, they speak to the provision on the percentage of the loan, percentage of the principal. In addition to that, if you have not the bank has not reviewed the entire portfolio, there's a need to make a provision of 2% of all the facilities that has not been reviewed. And what does this relate to? This relates to huge allowances for loan losses, reduced profitability, and reduced dividends for shareholders as well. Valuation prudential standards have been issued in that the banks now have to put in place certain policies and procedures when engaging valuers for assessing collateral. And there's a requirement for property values to almost sync with what the international financial reporting standards are saying in terms of the time it takes to collect on a particular security. Under the standards, you are required to make an estimation as to when you can likely collect a particular security. In our environment, it's almost like forever. So it means that if you have to do a present value of the value of that security 10 years down the road, it is almost zero. And what does that translate to? You need to make almost a full provision for that particular loan that has gone bad. A transitional period of 3 years have been given with respect to the 100% provision for accounts that has been classified as a loss. They have given the banks 3 years. I think the first year, I think it's 50%, 75%, and then it is 100%. So we'll be seeing, if things do not change, significant loan losses on the financial statements of these banks. And we come down to the impact on the ease of doing business. Delays in opening bank accounts due to the required customer due diligence and the KYC requirements. The requirements for source of funds declaration when making significant deposits. You may also find cases where you are going into the bank and requesting to change $100, and they will ask you for all the information of the source of funds because it may deem to be a suspicious transaction. Because the banks also have the leeway of deeming a transaction to be suspicious and requesting the required due diligence information in that regard. And like I said earlier on, if you're politically exposed persons, like some people in here, you are subject to enhanced due diligence. And fear of AML, CFT risk means that there is a risk of normal activities being flagged as suspicious. Inadequate foreclosure laws impacts the quick processing of loan facilities. It is very difficult for the bank to foreclose on a loan that has not been performing for the past 15 or 20 years. Coupled with the ECCB loss of provisioning, rules place pressure on the capital of banks, bearing in mind that the Basel II and III will require banks to hold significant amounts of capital so that dividends most likely would be depressed to a certain extent, other things being constant. So for the shareholders, don't be surprised if in times to come you realize that the loan loss provisioning is eating into the funds that are available for distribution as dividends. Do not be surprised. And it's because of all those requirements. We also have increased cost experienced by financial institutions in meeting the various regulatory requirements. Example, to have software that deals specifically with account monitoring. It is very difficult to deal with some of these things manually, and you have to invest in software. You also have cases where the international banks themselves will require an independent audit of the AML processes and procedures of the bank. And in some cases, it can result in significant cost to the institution. And customers deemed high risk may not be considered for banking services, resulting in bank account closures. There's an increase in time spent researching the law when dealing with transactions as amendments are not readily available. Uncertainty in application of laws in some instances may have implications to businesses such as the application of CARICOM tax treaty for certain cross-border transactions. In summary, the impact of the various laws and regulations impacts the ease of doing business in the banking space. It is therefore necessary that financial institutions become innovative in dealing with the impacts on their operations, such as leveraging technology to facilitate the quick processing of transactions. Governments too have a role to play in creating an environment where there is ease in doing business. Thank you. I was within my 30 minutes. So if you have any questions for me, I'm hoping that by now you understand when you go to the bank, why is it that they want all of this information? Because it has reputational risk for us as well. And the Financial Action Task Force, in their whole monitoring, they have the purview to gray list or blacklist a country. And when a country is blacklisted, you will find it very difficult for correspondent banks to do business with you. For that matter, I have been told that there's a particular country, which I have not researched it myself, so I will not call out the name of the country, that would not allow wire transfers to be sent to St. Lucia from that jurisdiction. Only because at one point in time, I believe St. Lucia was gray listed. That's correct, right? It was gray listed, so we cannot. If you want funds from that particular jurisdiction, you have to go through London or New York or somewhere else before it can come to St. Lucia. No direct dealing. So it has reputational risk for us as a jurisdiction as a whole. And the banks, the financial can only do the best in terms of minimizing that exposure. Bearing in mind now, we now have accountants and lawyers that have joined the fore in terms of the regulated persons. So these are serious things that we need to bear in mind in terms of our jurisdiction from a reputational perspective. So I don't know if you have any questions for me.
Good. Hi, good morning, Mrs. Senrose. I heard two themes today. One of them was digitization, and you spoke on de-risking and also regulations being imposed on banking. The Bank of England has ceased to issue the £100 note, and the result of that has been a significant uptick in digitization, digital financial services. Would you see that strategy implemented in the Caribbean as solving these two issues, a push towards digitization?
I'm not so sure that
it's towards,
yeah, go ahead, sorry,
a push towards reducing or mitigating the risk of money laundering within the Caribbean, if we were to remove the $100 note?
I'm not so sure that just moving the $100 note solved the problem.
Well, it would reduce the ability to easily circulate large sums of cash. Let's say, for example, $30,000 in 50s would be a suitcase of cash versus $100.
Well, the truth is that they still move the suitcase of cash. Unfortunately, they will still move the suitcase of cash. And the whole thing about the whole currencies and digitization, I had the experience of going through the airport in Atlanta, and no store would accept not even $5 from me to purchase a newspaper. Every single place I went to, they said, "I'm sorry, we do not accept cash. Card. If you don't have a card, you cannot conduct it." And I said, "Not even if I want to purchase a newspaper for $5? They said, "No, the smallest denomination, you cannot use the..."
Regulations in the Caribbean because we are not that digital? Is it because other countries are more or less reliant on cash?
No,
is
because
it that they're easier to comply with these
I do not think cash itself is the problem, you know. I don't think cash itself is the problem. It's the access to those illicit funds that's the problem. And moving the illicit funds throughout, that's the problem. I don't think that cash itself is the issue. Yes, if you have cash moving around, then people have suitcases of cash moving. That contributes to it. But they will find innovative ways of going around it. They'll use the same digital currency to move money from one criminal to another. So it's a question of having the systems in place that can minimize the exposure.
Thank you. Good morning. I just want to congratulate the board. This is my first Stanley French, and I'm really happy I did come out. Andrea, I enjoyed your presentation. But I want to just go back to, and just use my marketing experience to make a few suggestions. I really love, as a past teacher, to see the students here. I messaged Sister Rufina to see where the convent girls. But I want to just make a few suggestions for the marketing committee. I think one of the ways when we talk about getting the bank in the community is through the students. I know the convent, whom I'm involved in the graduation exercise, they do have every year a prize for the co-op, the student who saves the most in co-op, and the college has it as well. So Hess has it, thank you Hess. So all schools. Well, that's so wonderful. So here's the suggestion. Why don't we as an institution sponsor that award, and we can sponsor that award with a share to get the students to be involved and transfer these savings from the co-op to the bank. I think that's one thing that the bank can do with getting all the students involved from an early stage. But I want to say something on what Andrea said about de-risking. I think that, it's very good and it's great to try to assist. And I know that our bank, we have an ambassador. It's great to assist because not everybody wants to get into technology. But the threat of de-risking is a real one. I think a number of companies are impacted where there are regulations and you trade with businesses that, say, brings fuel out of Russia, if I can use our example. There are 2 countries in the region right now experiencing that threat because they did bring in fuel from Russia. So de-risking is important, and it in fact affects us not just in banking, but in every single sector. So great presentation, Andrea. I'm really happy I was able to listen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the fly in the ointment.
I was expecting you.
I know that the banks have to go through all of these procedures and make sure that everything is okay, and they know their clients. And I was told they have to know their client's client, and then the other client behind that, and the other client behind that, and the one behind that, and it goes on and on and on. But all of this has taken away any discretion from the people working at the bank. When a banker can look at me and ask me to do a declaration for $250, it's First National Bank. $250. Now, that day I lost it, totally lost it. And I know they have to follow the regulations, but what happens to the discretion that they used to have? And they know your customer, yes, but they know me. When you ask me to do a declaration for $250 because I have passed my threshold for the day, because I've deposited money for all those clients, not my money, because I signed on the account, I mean, that's taking it a little bit far. And what I have found is that the discretion that used to be there, that personal touch, is just gone out the door. I go to the bank and I have to be dealing with young people who've never seen me, and like my friend says, it's 2 dozen. Doesn't know, doesn't care. They really don't give a damn who you are. And they don't they're not trained to have this discretion. They don't have the experience either. And if you go to the bank and there are 12 tellers, the 12 tellers are going to one supervisor to approve a transaction. So you're going to stand in the bank for 2 hours anyway. And something has to be done to make it easier for banking. Otherwise, I too will be going to the beach to get a bag of sand to make a coffee.
I will let the managing director deal with that issue because it speaks to specific to the bank.
Thank you, Andrea. Thanks. So we appreciate that, your comments actually, but I'm going to link it into what Andrea would have just said, and Josh would have just asked a question regarding financial crimes. So I'm pleased that we are doing our jobs regarding ensuring that you are not coming to the bank and the tellers are using their discretions, right? Because crime don't have a face on it, right? Right. And here's the answer to that. You would have been told that you passed your threshold. So it's a simple conversation with the branch manager to say, listen, I want to review what my documents say my threshold is. I have now realizing that I'm exceeding my threshold, and a simple conversation with the branch manager, review your account and increase your threshold limit. Thereby, the face is not coming to the bank, and the teller is bypassing the bank's protocol and allowing potential money laundering to take place, right? So I'm pleased that that system is working. But I want to address Deborah's nice recommendation regarding the marketing team. And we'll take that into consideration, actually. But I also want to say for all the students that are here, with the parents' permission, of course, what we want to do as an indigenous bank is that you weren't here by any accident. We want to open an account for each and every single one of you and make a donation from First National Bank onto that account, right? So, of course, with the parents' permission, I know Vanel would have taken the names of each one of the students. So we'll need the numbers of the parents and all that also. So as an indigenous bank, we want to ensure that we are embracing the young people, embracing the high school, and we will be coming into each and every single high school. That's part of our plans going forward.
Very good. Yes, Mr. Snack? Oh. Derek?
Good afternoon already. Morning still, Derek George. You spoke about the issues of transferring monies. I experienced that with a bank where I was trying to transfer funds to pay someone in a country. And the bank told me that I am sorry, I am not going to transfer your funds to pay that individual because that country has been blacklisted. And as a result, it's not just the bank that will be at risk, but also the country. And all I tried to persuade, they said, Mr. George, tell the individual to get a bank in another country for us to transfer the funds. So I understand and appreciate that, right? My concern is really and truly is looking at the banking sector, financial sector within the CARICOM region. Because as small countries, we always looking to extend our business within CARICOM, or we are always encouraged to do business within CARICOM. However, to get funds out of some of those Caribbean brothers is absolutely a nightmare, right? So what is the financial institution? I know it's not Bank of Indonesia only, but what is the financial institution in the small Caribbean countries doing to assist businesses to facilitate trade with the bigger CARICOM countries, and as a result, get paid for those services and goods? Thanks.
In terms of currencies, talking about?
Currencies, yeah.
Well, I think Dr. Jules just made some reference to some initiative that is being pursued in terms of having payments made in the country of the jurisdiction. That's with Africa.
That's
okay.
with Africa.
So we can probably mirror something like that over here. You know, if that is the case, you put in Trinidad, then you pay them in Trinidad currency, you pay them in Barbados currency. Right, Dr. Jules? Isn't that possible?
And the central banks, a proposal was made that the Central Bank of Trinidad hold a basket of EC, and we hold a basket of TT, especially for the hucksters, the people who would go sell stuff in Trinidad from Grenada and St. Vincent. But it didn't work out. And frankly, it's just a failure on our part because there's no reason why the Central Bank of Trinidad should not have put this in place. And I think that's where now we need to flex. From my perspective, the priority is the trade within the OECS. When we strengthen that, then we can deal from a position of greater strength with that kind of problem with the wider CARICOM.
Oh, Dr. Jules, now I understand why it stopped. Because I was a beneficiary of that system. Thanks.
Good morning, Mr. Snack. Okay. Good morning, afternoon. Andrea, First National Bank, thanks for such a wonderful initiative. Listening to the ease of doing business within the banking space I think that caught my attention because I know that most of us have difficulty doing business within the banking space. What I gathered from you were all the challenges of doing business within the banking space, what all the regulations are, our ability to conform to the regulations. But when we speak of the ease of doing business within the banking space, the lack of ease in itself is a risk for the people doing business within the banking space. And if you have an untold or an unnecessary or undue length of time for the processing of accounts and loans and all of that, that can be serious and significant. So what I thought I would hear today is we have all of these issues doing business within the banking space, and how are we going to put measures in place to mitigate against that? And I think that is something that needs to be considered not only by First National Bank, but significantly by First National Bank, because First National Bank is our indigenous bank. First National Bank is our bank, so we should always be leading the charge as to how we do business, how we open accounts, how we do not take, why we should not have to take 3 and 4 months to open a bank account, why we should not have to take 3 and 4 months to get a loan. How do we deal with the SMEs? How do the SMEs have to conform within the environment to ensure that their businesses flow? Because anytime there is tardiness or delays in what we do, it affects us within the whole commerce space. So this is what I just wanted to reiterate, not to reiterate, but to highlight, so that at least when we talk about doing our ease of business within the banking space, that we give consideration to how we make it easier, faster, within the legal or the legal framework that allows us to do what we have to do. We understand that they are the legal frameworks, but how do we mitigate against that? How do we make it faster?
Yeah.
There must be a way to do that.
Yeah, and that is why I spoke to leveraging technology, because you have technology in place for the account opening process that you put in the information once, it can do all the due diligence work for you with the international networks. You can risk assess right away and capture the person's photo so you have it there when you go to the account to view a transaction. So these things are there. And there's also technology that allow you to monitor transactions in terms of people going to more than one branch. So in other words, they want to deposit $100,000, but they go to this branch, put 10 here, put 10 here, put 10 there.
So you can
you have software that can flag those transactions for increased monitoring. So from my perspective, is to leverage the technology and trading. Yeah, because the software is there to do it.
But all I'm saying is, we within a space, it's a commercial space. I mean, we have clients coming, we are accountants, we have clients coming from all parts of the world, but they do not understand that it should take 4 months or 3 months to open a bank account. It's either we're going to do it, it's right, it's within the process, or we're not going to be going to deny it because it's not within it. So I am saying that there must be a way that we can make it faster. And you're saying leveraging on the technology?
Yes.
I understand that, but we need to make it faster.
Well, leveraging on the technology and your client service initiatives, of course. The processes that you have in place to interact with your clients.
So that's a concern, and that is something that we need to...
So that would be something for Managing Director to take on as well.
Thanks. Thanks for your question, actually. That's a concern with, I think, all customers. Yes, it shouldn't take 4 months to open an account. That is an issue. I can tell you, though, to answer that question, is that we, my team and I, we actually, I think last week, beginning with the loan application process, we reviewed that complete application process. We actually found some solutions to make it quicker, easier. And Andrea is right, technology is one of those methods to leverage the efficiency of it. That's part of our strategic plan, which we'll discuss at a different forum, right, which is coming. Now, the account opening process. This is another one of our processes that, my team and I, again, the executive team will be breaking down and seeing how we can actually make that, easy as well. Because once we have all the documentation from the customer, it should not take, 3 months. So bear with us. We know that we have some, process that needs fixing, and trust me, we are working to fix those, processes.
Yes, Mr. Snack.
Yes, Mrs. St. Rose. There are many persons who are deemed to be PEPs by virtue of the work that they do. The thing is, when they stop doing that work, I understand there is a line, once a PEP, always a PEP.
Yes, actually, yes.
Why
currently
do they have to remain PEPs after they stop doing the work? And in fact, politically exposed persons, the very phrase itself seems to be a misnomer at that point. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
I would say that, from my perspective, the reasons why they kept as PEPs is that once you have developed these relationships endure. The relationship that you would have in your political position, it endures in terms of the people that you know, the people that you deal with, the people that you can call on. All related.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm not convinced really, because I'm saying while you're driving, you deem to be a politically exposed person. You stop driving. At no time did you own a car or anything like that. Why do you have to remain a politically exposed person when you have nothing to do with driving again?
Yeah, Mr. Snack, would you say that an ex-prime minister has no power at all? I'm just asking that question.
I can answer
political
that.
Power, that is.
In
terms of
there is every reason to think that that person may be a PEP. But I'm saying,
so they don't make the distinction. That's the problem. They put everybody in one basket called PEPs. They don't say ex-ministers, ex-PSs, they put everybody in one basket as PEPs. Unfortunately, we do not even have much control over that. Am I correct, madam?
Anyway. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Unfortunately, Mr. Snack, I think you'll be a PEP for the rest of your life. Just take it as a PEP. Just make sure you have all the enhanced due diligence information in a little envelope. When you go, you just hand it to them. Yes, Mr. Hinks.
Can you explain to me why is it I get booked for a festival, right?
Mm-hmm.
That the government is paying for. And I get a check. Oh. I go to the bank and they ask me a source of funds. That's government money.
I am aware of this situation. Mr. Senja, maybe you can help me there. I am aware of these situations.
And also, I want to know.
Also, if I'm cutting you short, I have heard situations where somebody's moving money from one account to another account in the same institution, and they've been asked for a source of funds. So I am aware of that.
So yeah. So I do jazz festival, and I get my check, and I go to the bank to deposit it in my account. I have to fill up a whole thing about a source of funds. That's government money, and government paid me to play music.
Well, you know, the truth
in
be
addition
told,
to that, right?
The truth be told, if I may just interrupt you, I think it may be the case, Mr. Hinkson, we are making the assumption, and we have to make the assumption that all payments that you get coming from a government institution, presumably, is above board. But it may be the case that you may be paid for something that says, well, every invoice you submit, you can put 5% on it. I'm just saying, just for argument's sake. So maybe, just for the avoidance of doubt, They want to know, well, this check that I received has to do with services delivered with respect to the jazz festival.
But there was no doubt about the tax they took before on the check.
The tax came from the government. The person who paid you, the government paid you, so they'll take the tax from you.
No, the government has the 10% that they take.
Yeah, notwithstanding, but I think it is just
there
for
was no doubt about where that 10% was from. So
I understand
why is there
that.
doubt about the origin of the total amount?
Because, remember we say that politically exposed people tend to be high risk.
And I also want to know how I became a pet.
I don't know. I'm not sure how you became a PEP. You probably have to ask. You can probably ask the authorities. The director over here might be able to help.
And finally, when I go to the bank and they ask, can I have your ID? What information they really want there? What is the crucial information they want in the ID?
Mr. Sencha, they want to know the ID is you, I guess. If your information is on the system.
I'm in a bank and you have a big poster of me in the bank with my guitar and you ask me for my ID. Well, look me there. Well, you ask me again. You see me every day in the bank. What's that?
Because they probably have a directive that you need to take a copy of the ID and put on file.
No, I bring up this point because I just think some of these things are totally unnecessary. Totally unnecessary. I understand all
the following process and procedure.
I understand all of the process and procedure that you need. But when I come into the bank all the time and you have a poster of me in the bank with your logo on my picture and you ask me for my ID, what's that?
I take your point. I take your point. There are anomalies that happen. Unintended consequences of process, yeah.
I think the points being raised by Boo is quite instructive in the sense that here is he, an accomplished solutions, a musician, well-known, going through that process and feeling that level of frustration. Why am I a PEP? Well, I respond, anybody who has accomplished anything in a small Caribbean country will be a PEP. So if you're not a PEP, you have to consider that you have achieved less than those who have achieved, because everybody who has achieved actually end up being a PEP. So it's fine to be a PEP. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it from my perspective. That's how, perhaps it's my comfort, but I am proud to be a PEP. Okay? That's one. But the issue of financial literacy and allowing the average person to not feel that you're asking them all of those questions and that you're interrogating them so that they can feel lesser is a very, very important point. And utilizing platforms to tell people why you do it, how it should happen, is very, very important for us to remove some level of that frustration that people feel when they interface with financial institutions. So I think we need to zoom into that and be very deliberate in relation to getting the information that you have here and breaking it down so that the average person can understand. I think there's one other point that we need to take as well, is the fact that ease of doing business also requires that we use lines such as hotlines and whistleblower lines to get information in there so that we can understand what the issues are. People are frustrated, they say things and then we move on. But getting that information through, and we do have a hotline to make sure that the complaints are coming through, because the best way to fix your service is to hear from people. I remember Cable and Wireless had this thing where they had a very B-mobile, a very, very colorful system and you know, of advertising and so forth. And suddenly they went into black and white, and that fell flat. Because the issue was not the ad, the issue is the service that the institution is providing. And so getting feedback, getting complaints, hearing people, you know, tear you apart, it's fine. You know, to hear from people rather than you believe that you're actually doing something right and you're not actually hearing from people.
Totally agree. Yes.
Something just dawned on me when we think about de-risking. How do you feel about citizenship by investment? Because I know right now the UK is looking at these programs very closely, And these monies are being deposited in our banks. When somebody applies to be a citizen with the attorneys like Deborah Glass or some of the people who do it, they are collecting these monies, and these monies are passing through our indigenous, now locals. Debs, you know, we are friends. But Andrea, seriously though, how do you, I mean, having worked in Dominica for 6 years, I think that economies that's built on these programs are not sustainable. But what do you see as an impact for our banking sector? Thanks.
My understanding is that the whole program internationally is viewed negatively for the Caribbean, because you have developed countries that have, you know, similar programs. Yeah. So it's something to do with the jurisdiction. That said, my understanding is that more than one professional services firm is engaged to perform the due diligence on the applicants. Additionally, the agents themselves locally are required to do the required due diligence. So you're hoping, I mean, some things will fall through the cracks, which I guess will happen, but the processes and the procedures are there to mitigate that risk. But my understanding is that it is not viewed positively. The same way the offshore banks are not viewed in a very good light. The offshore international banks, I should say, not viewed in a very good light, because there's the perception that, you know, it is, you know, has a high risk for laundering activities.
I heard my name called in connection with
CIP.
CIP. Let me tell you now, make it very clear, for the record, I have never, ever supported that idea. I think it is wrong. There is no way, and if you used to listen to the commentaries, you would have heard some commentaries on that. There is no way I will ever support that. I think it is prostitution, and there is no way I'm getting involved in that. Okay, I remember going to Vieux-Fort, and there's this bulletin board, maybe the size, no, bigger, twice the size of this at the airport. Come as a visitor, leave as a citizen, please. Seriously? Deborah Glass doesn't make money that way. I don't need that money.
Noted. Noted. So do you have any more questions for me? I take it that this is it. Thank you.
Another round of applause for Andrea. Yeah. As they say, all good things have to come to an end. Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, the task now of mine is to invite a gentleman who has sat with us on the board, who is, I didn't know that until today that he's a pep. But I want to call on Mr. Johnson Snack to do the final, to move the vote of thanks. Thank you, Mr. Snack.
Thank you, Mr. Master of Ceremonies. Okay. Permit me to adopt the protocol that has been established. A lot has been said about Mr. French, Stanley French, this morning. But I want to say that putting this event in the Stanley French Forum is very significant in the sense that he, Mr. French, if you recall, those of you who were there, he was always very particular about ensuring that education went on at our general meetings. He would always ask pertinent questions to ensure that the responses give something to those who attended. Now, some people viewed it differently, but I must say it is very interesting to have him in this particular forum. Dr. Jules, on behalf of the shareholders, Board of Management, and staff of First National Bank, St. Lucia Limited, I wish to thank you very sincerely for sharing with us your thoughts on the growth of First National Bank from a penny bank to a billion-dollar enterprise, as you said. I wish to thank you for such a treat. I didn't know before I got here that we would have had more icing on the cake from Mrs. St. Rose. And I do wish to thank you immensely for going through that area where a lot of us at some point have had an issue navigating it, or right now have issues navigating it. One of the things that you mentioned, Dr. Jules, that hit a chord was the new designation. Let me see if I get it correctly. Socio-economic strangulation. Actually, when you said this, my mind flashed way back to well, people might be able to guess my age. Way back to 1957, 58. It was a time when my brother and I walked from Bouton to Soufrière to school after the 1955 fire in Soufrière. And what I recall is that we had to walk along the seashore down to Soufrière. And on one of the estates, there were persons going to work on that estate. And they were discussing, we were little boys, but you could understand the vernacular then. They were saying that when you go to work on the plantation for the first time, you are paid fortnightly. But the very first time, you are paid only 1 week. And subsequently, when you work for 2 weeks, you get paid for 2 weeks. What that meant is that they had what they said was Yossi back pay, meaning 1 week pay being withheld. So at all times during their tenure there, the management of the estate would have their funds to finance the operation. Now, at the time, I didn't think of it as strangulation, but certainly, hearing you, Dr. Jules, I think it was, in fact, some form of strangulation. I would like to thank the audience for their participation in here this morning, this afternoon, for your many questions and the way that you have asked them in a rather civil manner, and the very apt responses we got from the speakers. I would also like to thank the persons behind the scene who put this together. You know, there is always somebody working behind the scene to put such events together, and normally we don't see them, but we know that they are working behind the scenes. And so, in closing, I wish to invite the audience to join me in once again thanking Dr. Jules and Mrs. St. Rose for their very excellent presentations here this morning, this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Snack. As you put it, well put it. Now, at this stage, I think we have taken up a lot of your time. And I don't want you to just leave like that. So this is the opportunity for us to meet and mingle. So I want to invite you very kindly to share a little time with us. And can I say the meeting is now closed? Thank you.
First National Bank Stanley French Education Forum brings you Investor Day on Saturday, November 4th, 2023. Come hear the strategic insights into the First National Bank's